Hi, welcome back. I'm Annette Dubrouillet, and we are reading The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Today is Chapter 8. Remember in Chapter 7, Mary had just found a key. She doesn't know what it opens, but she thinks it might be to the secret garden. Chapter 8 is entitled, The Robin Who Showed the Way. She looked over the key quite a long time. She turned it over and over and thought about it. As I have said before, she was not a child who had been trained to ask permission or consult her elders about things. She thought the key was that if she thought about the key as if it was the key to the closed garden, and she could find out where the door was. Perhaps she could open and see what was inside the walls and what had happened to the old rose trees. It was because it had been shut up so long that she wanted to see it. It seemed as if it must be different from other places, and that something strange must have happened to it during the 10 years. Besides that, if she liked it, she could go into it every day and shut the door behind her, and she could make up some play of her own and play all by herself. Because nobody would ever know where she was. They would think the door was still locked and the key still buried in the earth. The thought of that pleased her very much. Living, as it were, all by herself in a house with 100 mysteriously closed rooms and having nothing whatever to do to amuse herself, had set her inactive brain to working and was actually awakening her imagination. There is no doubt that the fresh, strong, pure air from the moor had a great deal to do with it. Just as it had given her an appetite and fighting with the wind had stirred her blood, so the same thing had stirred her mind. In India, it had always been too hot and languid and weak to care much about anything. But in this place, she began to care and want to do new things. Already she felt less contrary, though she did not know why. She put the key in her pocket and walked up and down the walk. No one but herself ever seemed to come there, so she could walk slowly and look at the wall, or rather, the ivy growing on it. The ivy was the baffling thing. However carefully she looked, she could not see anything but thickly growing, glossy, dark green leaves. She was very much disappointed. Something of her contrariness came back to her as she paced the walk and looked over it at the treetops inside. It seemed so silly, she said to herself, to be near it and not be able to get in. She took the key in her pocket when she went back to the house and made up her mind that she would always carry it with her when she went out, so that if she should ever find the hidden door, she would be ready. Mrs. Medlock had allowed Martha to sleep all night at the cottage, but she was back at her work in the morning with cheeks redder than ever and in the best of spirits. "I got up at 4 o'clock, she says. Aye, it was pretty on the moor with the birds getting up and the rabbits scampering and the sun a-rising. I didn't walk all the way. A man gave me a ride in his cart. I can tell you I did enjoy myself." She was full of stories of delights of her day out. Her mother had been glad to see her, and they had got all the baking and washing all out of the way. She even made each of the children a dough cake with a bit of brown sugar in it. I had them all popping out when they came in from playing on the moor, and the cottage all smelt nice and clean, and hot bacon, and there was a good fire, and they just shouted for joy. Oh, Dickens said our cottage was good enough for a king to live in. In the evening, they had all sat around the fire, and Martha and her mother had sewn patches on torn clothes and mended stockings, and Martha had told them about the little girl who had come from India and who had been waiting all of her life what Martha called blacks, until she didn't know how to put on her own stockings. "Aye, they did like to hear about you," said Martha. "They wanted to know about the blacks and the ship you came on. I couldn't tell them enough." Mary reflected a little. I'd tell you a great deal more before your next day out, she said, so that you will have more to talk about. I dare say they would like to hear about riding on elephants and camels, and about the officers going to hunt tigers.
My word, cried Martha. It was something clear off their heads. That would really do it. Miss, would you do that? It would be the same as a wild beast show us like they had seen once in York.
India is quite different from Yorkshire, Mary said slowly, as she thought the matter over. I never thought about that. Did Dickon and your mother like to hear your talk about me?
Why, old Dickon's eyes nearly jumped out of his head. They got so round, answered Martha. But Mother, she would put on about your seeming to be all by yourself. She said, and Mr. Craven got no governess for her, no nurse. And I said, no, he hadn't. Though Mrs. Medlock said he will when he thinks of it. But she says he maybe ain't think of it for 2 or 3 years.
I don't want a governess, said Mary sharply.
But Butler says you ought to be learning your book by this time, and you ought to have a woman to look after you. And she says, now, Martha, I think you just feel yourself in a big place like that, wandering around all alone. No, Mother, you wouldn't like it. You do your best to cheer her up, she says, and I say I would.
Mary gave her a long, steady look. You do cheer me up, she said. I like to hear you talk. Presently Martha went out of the room and came back with something held in her hand under her apron.
What was that? Think of that, she said with a cheerful grin. I bought me a present.
A present, exclaimed Mistress Mary. How could a cottage full of 14 hungry people give anyone a present?
A man was driving across the moor peddling, Martha said, and he stopped at our door. He had pots and pans, all odds ends, but his mother had no money but anything. Just as he was going away, our Elizabeth Ellen called out, Ma, he's got skipping ropes with red and blue handles. And Mother calls out quite on, hey, Mr. Stork, how much are they? And he said, 2pence. And Mother began fumbling in her pocket, and she says to me, Martha, that's brought me thy wages like good lass. And I've got 4 places to put every penny, but I'm just going to take 2pence out of it, buy that child a skipping rope. And she bought this one, and here it is.
She brought it out from under her apron and exhibited it quite proudly. It was a strong, slender rope with striped red and blue handle at each end. But Mary Lennox had never seen a skipping rope before. She gazed at it with a mystified expression. What is it for? She asked curiously.
For, cried out Martha. Does that mean that I never got a skipping rope in India? For all they got elephants and tigers and camels? No wonder most of them is black. That's what it's for. You just watch me.
And she ran into the middle of the room and taking it in each hand began to skip and skip and skip while Mary turned in her chair to stare at her. And the queer faces of the old portraits seemed to stare at her too and wonder what on earth this common little cottager had the impudence to do under their very noses. But Martha did not even see them. Her interest and curiosity in Mistress Mary's face delighted her, and she went on skipping and counting as she skipped until she had reached 100.
I can skip longer than that, she said when she stopped. I'll skip as much as 500 while I was 12. But I wasn't that fat then as I am now. I was in practice.
Mary got up from her chair, beginning to feel excited herself. It looks nice, she said. Your mother is a kind woman. Do you think I could ever skip like that?
You just try it, urged Mary, handing her the skipping rope. You can't skip 100 at first, but if you practice, you'll mount up. That's what Mother says. She says nothing'll do more good skipping rope. It's the sensiblest toy a child can have. Let her play out in the fresh air of skipping, and it'll stretch her legs and arms and give her some strength in them.
It was plain that there was not a great deal of strength in Mistress Mary's arms and legs when she first began to skip. She was not very clever at it, but she liked it so much that she did not want to stop.
But on the things, they run outside and skip outdoors, said Martha. Mother said I must tell you to keep outdoors as much as you can, even when it rains a bit, so that won't wipe up warm.
Mary put on her coat and hat and took her skipping rope over her arm. She opened the door to go out and then suddenly thought of something and turned back rather slowly. Martha, she said, they were your wages. It was your tuppence, really. Thank you. She said it stiffly because she was not used to thanking people or noticing that they did things for her. Thank you, she said, and held out her hand because she did not know what else to do. Mary gave her hand a clumsy little shake, as if she was not accustomed to this sort of thing either. Then she laughed. Aye, that old quain womanish thing. If that been our Elizabeth Ellen, she'd have given me a kiss. Mary looked stiffer than ever. Do you want me to kiss you? Martha laughed again. No, not for me. If that was different, that perhaps thou want thyself, but thou isn't. Run off outside and play with thy rope. Mistress Mary felt a little awkward as she went out of the room. Yorkshire people seemed strange, and Martha was always rather a puzzle to her. At first she disliked her very much, but now she did not. The skipping rope was a wonderful thing. She counted and skipped and counted, and her cheeks were quite red, and she was more interested than she had ever been in anything ever since she'd been born. The sun was shining and a little wind was blowing, not a rough wind, but one in which delightful little gusts brought fresh scent of newly turned earth with it. She skipped around the fountain garden and up one walk and down another. She skipped at last into the kitchen garden, and she saw Ben Weatherstaff digging and talking to his robin, which was hopping about him. She skipped down the walk toward him, and he lifted his head and looked at her with a curious expression. She had wondered if he would notice her. She really wanted him to see her skip. Well, exclaimed, upon my word, perhaps they're young un after all. Perhaps I got Charles' blood in our veins instead of blood of sour buttermilk. That Skip Red really got that Charles' blood into our veins. Sure as my name's Ben Weatherstaff. I wouldn't have believed that if I couldn't do it. I've never skipped before, said Mary. I'm just beginning. I can only go up to 20. Get on, said Ben. That shape's well enough for a young'un that live with heathen. Just see how he's watching thee, jerking his head toward the robin. He follow after thee yesterday. He'll be out again today. He'll be bound to find out what the skipping rope is. Ain't never seen one, eh? He shook his head at the bird. Curiosity be the death of them sometime, if that doesn't look short. Mary skipped all around the garden and around the orchard, resting every few minutes. At length she went on her own special walk and made up her mind to try if she could skip the whole length of it. It was a good long skip, and she began slowly, but before she had gone halfway down the path, she was so hot and breathless that she was obliged to stop. She did not mind much, because she had already counted up to 30. She stopped with a little laugh of pleasure, and there, lo and behold, was the robin, swinging on a long branch of ivy. He had followed her, and he greeted her with a chirp. As Mary skipped toward him, she felt something heavy in her pocket strike against her at each jump, and when she saw the robin, she laughed again. You showed me where the key was yesterday, she said. You ought to show me where the door is today, but I don't believe you know. The robin flew away from his swinging spray of ivy to the top of the wall, and now he opened his beak and sang a long, lovely trill, merely to show off. Nothing in the world is quite as adorably lovely as a robin when he shows off, and they are nearly always doing so. Mary Lennox had heard a great deal about magic in her Aya stories, and she always said that what happened almost at that moment was magic. Let me read that again. Mary Lennox had heard a great deal about magic in her Aya stories, and she always said that what happened almost at that moment was magic. One of the nice little gusts of wind rushed down the walk, and it was stronger than the rest of the gushes. It was strong enough to wave the branches of the trees, and it was more than strong enough to to sway the trailing sprays of the untrimmed ivy hanging from the wall. Mary had stepped close to the robin, and suddenly a gust of wind swung aside some loose ivy trails, and more suddenly still she jumped toward it and caught it in her hand. This she did because she had seen something under it, a round knob which had been covered by the leaves hanging over it. It was the knob of a door. She put her hands under the leaves and began to pull and push them aside. Thick as the ivy hung, it nearly all was loose and a swinging curtain, though some had crept over the wood and iron. Mary's heart began to thump and her hands to shake a little in her delight and excitement. The robin kept singing and twittering away and tilting his head on one side as if he were as excited as she was. What was this under her hand, which was square and made of iron, and which her fingers in it found a hole? It was the lock of the door that had been closed 10 years. And she put her hand in her pocket, drew out the key, found it, and fitted it in the keyhole. She put the key in and turned it. It took 2 hands to do it, but it did turn. And then she took a long breath, looked behind her up and down the long walk to see if anyone was coming. No one was coming. No one ever came, it seemed. She took another long breath because she could not help it. And she held back the swinging curtain of ivy, pushed back the door, which opened slowly, slowly. Then she slipped through it and shut it behind her and stood with her back against it, looking about her and breathing quite fast with excitement and wonder and delight. She was standing inside the secret garden. That's the end of chapter 8.